Hello there and welcome back to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, where we're once again on Fulgora, planet of scrap and pink science packs and lightning and other such shenaniganery. We now reckon that we've basically finished this planet because we have a steady stream of science packs coming out that are going in over here, filling up these rockets, and we have a number of other buildings and similar things that are being produced on this planet, so that's all looking pretty good. And so having finished it, we thought it'd be a good time to take a bit of a look at how things have been going on this planet, what we've got done, and how we feel about the way things have gone as well. And so Mike has started us off with asking, how did you find Fulgora and was it as you expected? And he said he was expecting it to be quite a lot more complicated, quite a lot sort of bigger and more involved. And I think that's because he's used to sort of vanilla planets like Norvis, where we've done an enormous amount of stuff on here. But then Norvis has 6 science packs to do, and we've also set up this planet to be exporting massive quantities of stuff for all of our building shenaniganery on other planets. So Norvis is a bit of a special case. Mike also missed some of our streams on Vulcanus, but he's had a look at it and seen that we've actually built quite a lot of stuff over here. And taking a look back at the list of streams, we spent about 4 streams centered around this planet based on just on the thumbnails of each one. So it took us a little while to get everything done over here that we wanted to do. Some of the other planets have been completed quite quickly, but in general we've spent typically 3 to 4 streams on a planet, and sometimes a few more if we've gone back to it. And so achieving very much an MVP on Fulgora in about half a stream, certainly less than 1 stream, came as quite a surprise to us. But then there's not an enormous amount of stuff that needs to be done to get something basic up and running on this planet. You need to pull up some scrap, you then need to crunch it up and sort it, and then there's a few steps for making the science packs, and as we discussed last time, then there's making the rockets, which is very, very easy. So there's not actually that much to produce the bare minimum that will actually launch off some of the rockets, and so that came as a bit of a surprise to him. He was expecting from things that people have been saying about it beforehand that it was going to be a rather complex and fiddly mechanic that we'd need to have a fairly hard think about, but he summarised it as being essentially having the production chain reversed. So you take a final product like scrap, then you turn that into something complicated like blue circuits, and then you can turn that into something simpler like red circuits, which can be turned into green circuits, and then into copper cable, and then into copper. So it's the same sort of thing as normal, but in reverse, which isn't that hard and that complicated. But then you do then have to take some of those things you've made and then run them back through in the opposite direction in order to make them back into the things that you actually want. But even so, it's not exactly complicated compared to some of the other places we've gone to. Tristan has pointed out that one of the reasons it was so easy compared to Vulcanus is that the Planetary Pioneers mod hasn't really made any changes to this planet. So whereas Vulcanus we had to go through a whole wood production process down here, which was going in and using this bacteria recipe and calcite and so on and so on and so on. And that then allowed us to make wood, which then, to be fair, we've only actually used for making belts. But we did want to use that for making belts over here because belts are mostly made out of iron, and there's loads and loads of iron on this planet, so it's a very good place to make them. And if you want to make the green belts, you require a supply of tungsten as well in here to make the green belts, and so you're going to want to make the green belts on Vulcanus, which means you might as well make all of the ones beforehand. There's no point in shipping in blue belts in order to ship out green belts. You might as well just do everything on site here. And so we did actually end up needing that supply of wood. Also, there's a certain amount of combat that needed to be done because of the demolishers, and now whilst we found better ways since, I think, we did initially start trying to defeat them by using ammunition, which means you need to have woods to make the brown ammo, in order to make the yellow ammo, in order to make the red ammo. And so there was a certain incentive over here to get the woods system up and running and have that flowing and working. Additionally, we've also set up an enormous area to make massive quantities of machines, which we haven't done to anything like the same scale on Fulgora yet. Maybe we'll do that in the future, we shall see. However, on Fulgora, we do have wooden gears coming through from the scrap recycling, and we are turning those back into lumber and wood, so we have a supply of those things available. But I believe there is an additional mod that can be turned on that we appear to have missed, which adds in some additional ways of doing wooden things on Fulgora. But as you can see here, we're not actually using any of this wood at all. None of these belts go anywhere, and I don't think we're taking anything away from here by bots to go into our little bot mall area up here. Because basically we've been dropping in most of the stuff we need from the lime, because it's easier to build the stuff on Norvis and ship it over here. So all of these assembly machines, all of the belts, all the chemical plants, not the accumulators actually, they have been made on site, but many machines are being made on other planets and being brought over to here in order to get things up and running. About the only thing that we're going to be making en masse here is things like the Tesla turrets and the EM plants and maybe some of the lightning bolts and the recyclers and those sort of things. But in general, we're not making things on this planet in the same sort of quantities where we were on a lot of the other ones, and that's made it a lot easier. Sophia agrees on that point as well. If we tried to build all of the infrastructure on this planet, it would have taken quite a lot more, certainly quite a lot more stuff and hardware being scattered around. If we'd done the whole thing through a bot mall system like this, then maybe it wouldn't have taken up that much more physical space, but there'd have been a lot more pulling through of things like iron and steel and copper and wood and so on to make all those bits and pieces we needed. And we'd have run into a similar sort of problem to the one we had when we first landed on Maluna, where we didn't have any of the belts, and so the factory's expansion was very much limited by trying to get all the belts together. Now, since wooden gears come out of the scrap recycling, I don't think we'd have been struggling as much as we did on Maluna, because we would have had plenty of wood available. As you probably remember, when we went to Maluna, the limiting factor on getting us started was just getting hold of enough wood. It was coming through at such a slow trickle that it took forever to get it up and running to the point where we could build belts at a decent rate. Whereas because all these wooden gears are pouring out over here, I mean, you can see we're junking them by the ton over here. There's so much wood available on this planet, it's not particularly difficult, at least with this mod setting. So I don't think it would have been anything like as difficult as Maluna, but it would have put in some extra things for us to think about. We just spent a load of time waiting for machines and belts and so on to all be built up, and so that would have slowed us down quite a lot. The other big factor that Sophia points out is that with 5 people working on it, you can put stuff together incredibly quickly, especially when all of the resources you need are just being dropped in from space. So when we first landed here, we had one person building up the mine, one person building the recyclers, one person building the sorter, and somebody else thinking about the science, or possibly the power, and so on and so on and so on. So we had 5 different people attacking different problems, basically in parallel. So Tristan was making the holmium juice over here, and Mark was making the electrolyte, and Sophia was making the superconductors, and I was working on science, and then Mark came down here to do the rocket fuel, and yeah, everything comes together very, very quickly when you have 5 people working on it. So we say, yes, we got to an MVP in maybe, call it 2/3 of a stream, maybe 3 hours, but with 5 people, that's 15 hours of play, which is a significant amount of time. And I'm calling it an MVP because, yes, we had a trickle of science coming through, but it wasn't coming through very quickly, and may well potentially run into issues in the future. It's slightly hard to say. Mike also notes that he'd had an opinion of some of the modded planets we've done, particularly probably Cubium and Igris, because those are the only sort of real big ones, because I think Maluna and Lignumis are sort of, because they're called moons, it makes them feel smaller. You expect them to be less of a big deal. But having seen Cubium and Igris and how quickly we got through those, Mike was not disappointed, but had noted that he'd expected the modded planets to be a bit bigger. However, now having seen us working through Fulgora, because remember, he didn't really see Vulcanus properly, having seen how quickly we did Fulgora as well, he's now got more of an impression of the planets all being a bit more of an even size, which I think is probably a good thing. It makes the modded planets feel a bit more like they belong, rather than them being sort of little appetizers before you get onto the main courses of the proper vanilla planets. This does, of course, at least partly come down to the fact that there's 5 of us throwing ourselves against this, and we are all fairly experienced Factorio players at this point. So the fact that we can throw 5 people at it means we can churn through even a relatively complicated planet quite quickly. Tristan concurs on that one as well. He feels that with perhaps the exception of Norvis, which, as I say, has 6 science packs and also is being our sort of hub, producing absolutely everything we need, the planets generally get up to an MVP, especially for per science pack, in 1 or 2 streams. We went back to Maluna and we went back to Lignumis later on, sure, for extra added stuff on those. But basically, we've got them up to, they're making their first science packs easily within the first couple of streams on them, if not on the first stream. He's noted that the biggest thing that tends to slow stuff down is when we have a bit of a bottleneck because somebody's waiting for somebody else to do something before they can do the thing they're trying to do. I remember one of those on Maluna when we did the rebuild was that I was waiting for Sophia to finish off this enormous plastic production facility, because yes, everything down to here is producing plastic, before I knew where to drop in the systems for making the circuits and then onto the science packs, because we wanted it to be sort of somewhat linear along this bus we've got going along here. Or on Fulgora, there's producing one of the various different things in turn before you're ready to actually produce the science packs. Now this one wasn't quite so bad because it's just a sort of a single machine for each one, but there's often cases where you can't actually work on the next thing because the recipe hasn't been unlocked yet. You can blind build based on what knowledge you've got from the Factoriopedia, sure, but it's not quite the same, and it's not as much fun doing it that way because it's a bit more of a headache and a bit more. It's just not as enjoyable, and so there's definitely a temptation to wait for people to finish the previous thing to unlock the bit of the next recipe that you want to work on. And Fulgora is a good example of that, because after you've landed on Fulgora, you need to mine up a vault ruin to get the recyclers. Fine, that's not too bad. Then you need to get some holmium ore, so you need to start scrap recycling in order to get all the bits and pieces out to start thinking about holmium. And then you need to make a load of holmium before you can learn about EM facilities and the various ingredients that go into the science pack. And then you need to make some supercapacitors before you can actually start putting down machines in order to make the science packs. So each of those stages, you can't just tell somebody to go off and do it without them having to blind build or build with machines they've never even heard of, because we won't have any EM plants yet. So you do need to very much work through these different steps before you can get the science packs up and running. And this is why we've often said that playing multiplayer with 5 people isn't 5 times as fast as playing single player, because you have these sort of bottlenecks, and also you sometimes have some communication problems when people are trying to do things in different ways or in different places. And so yeah, there's a certain amount of overhead from having a large number of people. The mythical man month definitely rears its head here a bit, but obviously working with 5 people is significantly quicker than doing it with only 1 person. So I think it works in both ways there. Sophia has noted that getting over to Fulgora and having that MVP up in the first stream there came very much of a surprise to him, because we were actually on Cubium at the start of that stream, and there were a few things to finish off. I don't think I'd even got the rockets launching properly, because I still had a load of messing around with some of these emotions to do over here. Or was that the previous stream? I'm not sure. Certainly there was some expansion required on Cubium, so we got started over here, and then we went, well, I'm just tinkering around, finishing a few things off here and waiting for production to get up to speed and see if it actually works. Why doesn't everyone go off to Fulgora and have a look around? And then by the end of the stream, we got pink science packs appearing. So it all happened very, very quickly. And he's also noted once again that having the seeding ship dropping down enormous quantities of all of the bits and pieces we needed made an absolutely enormous difference. If we'd been trying to make all of this on site, we'd probably still be there now, still trying to work towards our first pink science pack, I suspect. Mike has also suggested that perhaps one of the reasons things seem to come together quite easily is he was very, very blasé about destroying resources. So, for example, there is probably a certain amount of the holmium ore being recycled over here as it comes through, because we've got one side of the belt being full. We've not bothered to balance it, we've not bothered to do anything like that. But it is quite easy to fall into the feeling of holmium ore being quite valuable and therefore not wanting to recycle it. And likewise with some of the other things, like, I don't know, maybe green circuits. There are various things in here that seem fairly valuable, and so a bit more effort could perhaps be put into not destroying them. But then on the other hand, the scrap is, well, it's not unlimited. We're down to 80,000 in this patch now from, I don't know what we started at, but it was a lot more than 80,000, I can tell you that. I think it was about triple that, but I'm not certain. But then down at the other end of this line over here, we've got 23 million of it, so it's going to be a long time before we run out of scrap. Maybe at some point we'll work out, when the system is just producing science packs, which resource we have the least of, and then monitor that one and tell it to stop when there's too much of that. Or more likely, we'll monitor when these chests over here are full, and if the chests are full, then we can stop the input running over here and just send the whole system to sleep. We'd have to make sure that we had enough rocket parts in order to get the rockets to launch. But, all of these things can be done. We can monitor these belts, make sure we've got enough fuel, enough blue circuits, enough low-density structures, and enough science packs. And at that point, we can tell the whole system to shut down. Oh, and I suppose all of the buildings that we're trying to ship out of. But you get the idea. These things can be looked for, and then we can turn the factory off on this planet when it's not needed. Tristan has said, yes, he was expecting it to be more different as well. And in fact, because we weren't building the belts on here, so I was repeating what he said in the notes. Because we're not making things like belts and machines on here, this is pretty much a vanilla planet for all, as far as we're concerned. Now, okay, it's not entirely vanilla because we come in with the Igrian recipes and the Cubium recipes over here, but as I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, I think those have actually made it easier rather than harder. And so this is basically a vanilla planet, whereas normally when you go somewhere in a modded playthrough, you expect lots and lots of things to be made harder and weirder and just a bit more complicated. But I guess in Planetary Pioneers, a lot of the complication comes from the sheer number of planets. Each individual planet is fairly easy, which is why we typically take 2 to 4 streams to get through each one. But then when you add them all together, the whole becomes quite a lot more complicated, and there's a lot of planets to do. Each one is hopefully is going to be different, and so there's going to be lots and lots of things for us to play with. Sophia says one of his big regrets is one of hindsight with the scrap recycling system here. Knowing what he knows now, he would have done this rather differently. I imagine the end result would have been pretty much the same. We'd have had belts of all the resources coming out over here, and a system to recycle excess and so on. But there are a few things that could be fixed, like for example, not feeding resources that you're just going to recycle again round through the splitter down here, because that just slows down the throughput. And maybe having a system that allows you to have more than one green belt's worth of resource being fed into the bottom without it all tangling up. I'm not quite sure exactly how he would do this, but there are certainly ways that it could be done. And so, as I say, I'm sure if he did it again, he would do it significantly differently and probably better. One of the things he has done is noted which of the things we seem to be struggling to deal with because we have too many of them. And the obvious two are going to be the iron gears and the wooden gears. And so, as you see down here, we've got a machine recycling the iron gears and recycling the wooden gears to dispose of those a bit more quickly. Now, we're still feeding out the lumber from those, and the iron we do actually want, but then we're also feeding out the lumber onto the belt up here, so it's then going up to be destroyed up further upstream, but that's kind of okay. And on the occasions when we do actually have too much steel, then he's got a machine here destroying the steel. There are a few little tips that some people have given us, like for example, if you turn your steel into steel chests and then recycle it, you can delete steel a lot more quickly. So maybe that's the thing we should be doing. Although that said, watching this, it is getting through all of the steel that's coming in over here, so that is actually fine. Another possibility for expansion for this system would be to have another one of these, but then they only pull out the things you actually want. So for example, we could look along here and go, okay, we're using lots of batteries and stone and copper cables and plastic and copper, but we're not really using the iron gears or the wooden gears or the ice, so let's just demolish those on site. And so you could split out the ones you actually care about and then just feed the other ones over to a loop of recyclers and not care about what goes into what, just destroy them over that way. So that'd be a little bit smaller and neater. But this is one of those things where you run into geographical problems. There's not really space to redesign this down here because we've tucked it into a corner of this island. We've got the recyclers down here, then the sorting system, and then above that is the bottom wall. So we've got a little bit of space up here, sure, but and there's nothing off to the east we can use here or down here. We're very much crammed into a corner here. So perhaps if we wanted to expand it, we'd end up taking the scrap that perhaps will come in by this train, then doing something with it on here, and then piping belts worth of useful stuff up this way. And I could see a number of different ways that could come together. So there's certainly some potential there. My thought was that the MVP we built up here was quite similar to the one I made in my single player run, although I will say that this design of Sortimatron is significantly neater than the one I built first. I think this is about the second or third generation Sortimatron that I made, and then it was fairly similar to this one. Although even then, I don't think I was doing the recycling quite on site in the same way that Sphere is here. I was feeding all of the excess stuff over to a separate recycling area that was churning through all of that and re-demolishing it. So it's a slightly different design, but functionally pretty similar. From there, the science production, all fairly similar. One of the big things I did notice is that we found a significantly larger island than the one I went to first. And also, because we're using a bot mall and they're a lot more compact, and we're not building the resources and infrastructure buildings on site, it's taken up a lot less space than my original design did. Now, I think the finding a bigger island was basically a sort of a luck and a skill thing, in that we spent a bit more time and effort looking for a bigger island, and with 5 people it's quite a lot quicker to scout out, but also I think we were quite lucky that we found such a good one that not only did it have quite a big island here, it was then also touching a small island over here, which granted we haven't used, and a smaller island here which has quite a lot of scrap on it, and is then also in cable range of this massive island over here that we can fill up with accumulators. So this is a really, really good starting point, and I'm slightly jealous of it, and I wish I'd found one just as good in my run as well. So the MVP, basic production of the first few science packs, was very, very similar. The thing that I think has made a big difference here is using the Igrian machines and the Cubium recipes, and that means we're getting somewhere in the region of 10 times as many science packs out for all of the ingredients going in. So that means you need a lot less holmium, you need a lot less plastic, which means fewer red circuits destroyed, you need a lot fewer batteries, and so on and so on. So it's much, much easier to produce a large quantity of science when you're using all of these things. And okay, you do need to bring in the magic fluid in order to get that to work, but then once you've got the cubes in and got that set up, that is just a completely passive system. So this is giving us an enormous bonus compared to what we had before. And looking at this system, it's producing almost 10 EM science packs per second. So for a similar level of scrap recycling, using vanilla recipes, you'd be at about 1 science per second. So I think that's made quite a big difference, and that's part of why I thought we were going to struggle more with Fulgora than we actually have, because I was expecting it to need a massive, massive scaling up to be maybe 10 times the size of this. Okay, maybe 5 times the size of this, because we're not going quite that quickly yet. But it was going to need to be made much, much bigger, and fitting that on this island would have been very, very difficult. We may have had to go off to other islands and maybe set up train systems. I don't know how we'd have set it up, but I do know that having 10 times as much science coming out of the lab machines over here that are making it per ingredient that you put in is going to have made an enormous difference there, and that has made things a lot easier, and I think is part of why we've been able to skedaddle off to another planet quite so quickly. Potentially in the future we'll get to a point where we're actually wanting to do science at a much, much higher rate, and this will need to be upgraded significantly further, and that might put a bit of a damper onto the whole system, because I have noticed that when we're making quite a lot of the EM facilities and the lightning turrets over here, we do put quite a heavy load on the superconductors and possibly on the supercapacitors as well, to the point that the science production starts to be starved of inputs. And if we look over here, you can see there's not an enormous amount of copper coming in over here. There is enough at the moment, because I think we've caught up a bit, but it's struggling a little bit. And the plastic is also quite limited. So there are some things in here that could cause us issues down the line if we need to step the production rates up at all over here. We also only have 1 machine making the EM plants over here. At the moment, It's enough because we're not taking them anywhere yet. But there's less than 20 in here, and okay, I think there's another 20 in the rocket silos. But there's only about 40 or so available. If we start trying to use these en masse, in the same way we've been burning through foundries over on Norvis, then that might start to be a problem, and we might need to step up our game there. And that's also going to be very limited by the rate we're making refined concrete at. If we look down here, concrete is in fact one of the most limited resources. Okay, there are other things that are just flowing straight through. Batteries look pretty bad, and stone as well. But also, concrete is one of the big ones there. We do have a significant shortage of concrete, and we could do with a lot more of that. But we just, while we're making these machines, we are ripping through it very, very quickly. So again, that's another sign that maybe we need to expand the scrap processing a bit. Saphira has commented on quality production. So, yes, Fulgora is quite a good place to make quality items because you've got the recycling. So you can make something with a load of quality modules and then recycle it either to get back higher quality ingredients or because the quality boost failed and just get back the original ingredients and keep churning round and round and round in a loop like that until you actually get out the bits and pieces you want. And that works really well if you're burning through things that you've got a huge supply of. So over here we seem to have a decent amount of steel again now, which is a bit of a surprise because we had a shortage before. We've got a good number of red circuits, we've got lots of low density structures. All of these things, we could be churning through all of these in some sort of quality boosting system, just trying to get better stuff out at the other end. Or even wood to get better belts. I don't know if that's probably not particularly useful. But there's lots of things up here that we could be churning through because we've got large quantities of it available. We aren't doing that yet, but we certainly could. We have started putting in quality modules into the machines that are making machines, because things like guns and turrets and the machines in general, it is very, very useful to have higher quality versions of those. We should probably be quality boosting our accumulators as well. Having some better ones of those would be nice. And so this could be a great place to produce lots and lots of high quality stuff, but once again, that's going to need a larger input of raw resources if we're going to get that up and running. And so once again, we're probably going to need to find some way to expand all of this system down here, whilst trying to cram it all through one green belt up here, which obviously isn't going to work. So in that case, we're going to need to find a better way to do the sorting. And now we're up to speed on all of those opinions. Let's take a bit of a look at the research that's been done since last time. Because we did the Maluna upgrade, we've gained a few extra things from here. So for example, we've got the lunar regolith digging, which allows you to pull up the regolith and the crushed stone, and then to crush that down to get some stone, crushed stone, and uranium ore out of it. I don't think we've actually really used this yet, but it's certainly a thing we could potentially use in the future. We got a bit lucky with our timing on Maluna because we started playing before the update happened, which meant we got some uranium patches on this planet that have been sort of grandfathered in. So even though the basic mechanics of the planet have changed, we haven't changed the way it's been generated. So we do have a sizable patch of uranium here, which we're able to then refine and covarex and then send down here in order to make the nuclear fuel cells, which we seem to have run out of. There is a problem up here. We don't have any of the dull uranium coming through. That's going to need looking into and fixing and making work. That said, we do have a lot of uranium fuel cells on the belts down here, so we're not going to run out of power for a good long time. Similarly, from Maluna, we got the rocket buggy, which gets you this little guy. It's a car that is bigger, faster, and rocketier. It has a little rocket turret on top of it there. You see, we've taken apart a Spidertron and put its head on there. Now, we probably shouldn't have those yet because we don't have rocket turrets, but never mind, we've got them from this. So that'll be a quicker way to explore other planets if we decide we want to do that in the future. We discovered telescopes, which allows us to gather the data that's required for the exploration science pack, and also many ways of transferring data around, and many, many places where we can find data, so that's lovely. And nano-firmed polymer, which allows us to make the diffuse plastic bar and the microcellular plastic bar, and then move on to making the low-density space platform, and then eventually on to making the exploration science pack. So we picked up all of those. And then it was on to Cubium, where we did many, many things. We discovered the planets, we discovered Cube Jelly, Cube Mastery 2, which is the yellow cubes, Cube Mastery 3, which is all the emotional situations, and Cube Mastery 4, which we got from doing the Dream Essence. And that allowed us to make all of the science packs with the Magic Cube recipes, which has, as you've seen, been rather fantastic. We also got the cube methods of making the express transport belts from Dreams, apparently, which is a little bit silly. We've not bothered with that, because as you've seen, we've been dropping everything in from space when we've needed belts, and also turbo transport belts in the same kind of way. So that requires inverted microcubes and Dream Concentrate, Hope and Courage, and various other things as well. So once again, we've not bothered to make any of those at all, because that seems like a silly way to make them when you might as well just import them from another planet. Then it was off to Fulgora, which we've discussed a little bit. We discovered the planet, so then we discovered recycling to turn all the scrap into useful things. We learned how to make holmium processing, and then we learned about electromagnetic plants. Those are fantastic. And then we learned about the electromagnetic science pack, and we started making them. That allowed us to pick up Tesla weapons, which got us the lightning gun and the lightning turret, and also the ammunition for the lightning gun. So that's great. We've now got a lightning gun. We can use that to scare off any nasties we might find out there. How many of these we'll actually use remains to be seen, but they're quite nice weapons, so I suspect we'll use at least a few of them. And then we discovered Corundum, where we've headed off over there and had a little bit of a look around, but we haven't really got started yet. So there's nothing to tell you about this planet, except that it's our next goal, and that's where we're going to. However, I will tell you that it has a lot of lightning, so before we went out there, Tristan asked if we could have the lightning collector as well, which is like an upgraded version of the lightning rod. It has a bigger coverage area, and apparently is more efficient for generating power as well. While we were picking off some of the nice Fulgoran research type things, we also picked up the mech armor. So at the moment we've got the prototype mech armors, which are, well, they're a little bit slower, they're a little bit less wieldy, they're not as tough. They're generally a less good version of the mech armor. Now we have the mech armor unlocked, we can start actually making these things, but they're quite pricey. They require a load of blue circuits, holmium, superconductors, supercapacitors, and also power armor 2s. So there's going to be quite a lot of effort required to make those. However, I feel that Fulgora is the obvious place to do that, given that it's got all of the bits and pieces that you need in order to make them. Finally, we've picked up the Space Crusher 2, which is it requires tungsten to make it. It's presumably a slightly better version of the normal Space Crusher. We've not really been using these ones very much because they have that built-in quality boost, and that's not very useful unless you actually want quality stuff. And so far we haven't really wanted to upgrade the quality of the stuff we're getting out of asteroid chunks. But in the future, I think that could potentially be useful. We'll see how it goes.
And we've of course rattled through various types of productivity research. We've got some artillery shell damage improvements and artillery shell speed improvements. I guess it's firing speed. We've increased the copper plate productivity for Icarus and the glass productivity for Icarus. We've increased laser weapon damage up to 7. We've increased low density structure productivity and mining productivity and physical projectile damage and processing unit productivity, rocket power productivity, steel plate productivity, and thruster fuel productivity.
All of those simply mean that when you make one of these things, you get more of it coming out the other side. Except for the weapon ones, which just mean you get more damage or more range or more of whatever I said. But the productivity researches are all very useful because they mean you get through less of your resources in order to produce all the things you're trying to make. So it's nice to have. It's not vital. It doesn't give you any exciting new toys to play with, but it does mean you can make the toys that you've got so far a little bit more cheaply. And of course, science packs become a little bit easier and cheaper to make as well. Your resources go further. And so I think that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to give Planetary Pioneers a crack yourself and deal with these many planets we have out here, you can download the Planetary Pioneers mod from the Factorio mod portal, install it and go nuts. Just have fun with it. If you'd like to watch us playing, come back on Monday at 7:30 PM UK time when we shall have another stream and we'll be carrying on. Well, at this point we'll be carrying on with Corundum, but by the time you see this video and the next stream, who knows, maybe we'll found yet another planet. And where will that be? I'm afraid not even I know that one yet. Taking the game into a third dimension, I shall be playing some more Foundry on Wednesday at 8 PM. This game is basically Factorio but in a Minecraft world, so you've got tunnels and bridges and all those sort of things, and 3D spaghetti of belts. I'm really enjoying it. I'd say it's my second favourite factory game out there, after the obvious Factorio. So yeah, please come along and join me for that one. It's been great fun. The game is still early access, but there's a lot of content in there, and as I say, I'm really enjoying it. Finally, there'll be these videos coming out every Thursday and Friday. Keep your eyes out for those, and please make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on anything. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.